The promise was simple and private, made on an ordinary night. His past would never come between us. It wasn't dramatic. It was two grown men choosing a life. For years, I believed it the way you believe in the ground beneath your feet, without thinking. Then came the evening that unsettled the floorboards. I stopped by his office after hours with dinner, his favorite, still warm, a small peace offering after a tense week. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that echoes. Down the hall, I heard soft music, the pop of a cork, and two voices that knew each other well. I stood there and watched the scene arrange itself like a photograph you can't unsee. Blueprints spread wide, glasses raised, heads leaning close in that easy, unguarded way people wear when they feel understood. They weren't touching. They didn't need to. The room itself was an embrace I wasn't part of. That night, I learned something about promises. They don't always explode. Sometimes they thin, thread by thread, until one evening you realize you're holding the loose end. I wasn't looking at scandal. I was looking at exclusion. And the man beside my husband, the man I'd been told was a closed chapter, had a name I already knew by heart. Some promises never leave the room. This one had just invited a guest. Before all this, life was steady. Small town, familiar routines. 7 married years that had weathered bills, family surprises, and the quiet ordinary days that actually build a life. I'm Ethan. I write for a living, which means I live in my head more than most. Caleb, my husband, is an interior architect, measured, practical, the kind of man who brings shape to air. He anchored me, I lifted him. Our house held both of us, his clean lines, my soft corners. Morning coffee on the porch, long walks with the dog, the quiet relief of being a team. People called us solid. I agreed. Every long relationship has to talk about old loves. Ours happened by a fire, a year into the marriage. He told me about Alex College. First big love, strong and bright, until it wasn't. He spoke with a fondness, worn smooth by time. I told him my history, and together, without ceremony, we made a promise. We are each other's present and future. The past stays where it belongs. It was the kind of vow that becomes architecture. Some promises never leave the room. I believed this one wouldn't. 3 months ago, he came home lit from the inside. He'd finally do it, leave the firm, open the boutique studio he'd sketched on napkins for years. I poured wine, we celebrated. I found the perfect partner, he said. Smart, connected, sees design the way I do. I asked who. He paused barely, but enough. Alex. We bumped into each other at a conference. The name hovered. I tried on my bravest smile. This is business, I told myself. I'm not going to be the jealous spouse in my own story. He promised it was purely professional. Another promise. One chose belief, because marriage often asks for it. Change didn't arrive with a crash. It drifted in like fog. Late nights multiplied, followed by the kind of energy that doesn't come from coffee. He spoke in we. We are thinking, we are designing, we have a vision. His phone, once retired to the counter in the evenings, started buzzing through dinner. Their inside jokes formed a language I didn't speak. I watched our life from the audience while my writing stalled on an empty page. Doubt is loud, even when you say nothing. On our 8th anniversary, I set the table for a tradition, the restaurant from our first date. Candles, waiting for the return home. An hour past go time, he called, breathless. A breakthrough, he said. In the background, laughter that wasn't mine. Can we push to the weekend? I'll make it up to you. When he came home, I tried to name the hurt. He called it paranoia. Work, he said. For us. And suddenly my pain was the problem. We slept in a silence that felt like distance with a spine. If you've ever been told your pain was paranoia, share your story below. And if you want to see how this finally breaks open and what we do with the pieces, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Politeness settled over the house like plastic on furniture. In a small town, news travels without trying. A lingering lunch, a late night at a bar, sketches on napkins, laughter that sounded like relief. I did things I'm not proud of. Checked the phone, peeked at emails. Nothing romantic, nothing damning, just relentless work. Somehow, the absence of proof hurt more. It fed the story that I was the crack in the wall. So I tried a peace offering, his favorite dinner, packed and warm. I let myself into the studio. The hallway was dark except for a pool of light where they stood, two men in a glow that looked like home. The champagne corks echo, the easy lean over blueprints, the shared triumph. No kiss, no touch, just intimacy with its sleeves rolled up. I knew then what my place had become, outside the circle. I didn't yell. I stood in the doorway holding the basket. Their laughter stopped. Alex excused himself. In the quiet that followed, I said the only thing that mattered. This wasn't about cheating. It was about the promise. You brought him into the middle of us. You built a room I wasn't invited to and called me paranoid for noticing. You let me drown while you celebrated on shore. For the first time, Caleb didn't argue. He took the basket from my hand like it was heavier than it looked. "I'm sorry," he said, voice unsteady. "I took you for granted. I broke our promise. Truth doesn't repair a house, but it does open a door." The weeks after were work, the unpretty kind. Counseling, boundaries at the studio that turned late nights into office hours. He didn't end the partnership. Contracts and payroll are real, but he ended the blur. He learned to come home not just in body, but in spirit. We learned to talk again, not to win, but to understand. Trust isn't a monument. It's a garden. You don't build it once, you tend it. The past doesn't have to wreck the present, but it has gravity. You counter it by actively protecting what you have. That quiet promise we made by the fire. It did leave the room for a while. We fought hard to bring it back in. And now we don't just remember it. We live it. Some promises never leave the room. Your turn. What would you have done in my place? Could you forgive a betrayal of trust, even a non-physical one? Tell me below. I read every comment, and it always amazes me how differently people define forgiveness. For some, it's the moment you let go. For others, it's the quiet decision to keep showing up, even when your heart still trembles. Maybe you've stood in that same kind of silence, waiting for someone to see you again, or realizing that love doesn't always mean never being hurt, but choosing to stay open anyway. If this story found a reflection of your own, I hope you'll share it. Thank you for staying until the end, for giving your time, your empathy, and a piece of your own memory to this story. The next episode is already being written, another quiet storm, another test of love's endurance. So, if you want to walk with us a little further, subscribe. Because sometimes, healing isn't found in the ending, it's in the stories we tell while we're still learning how to begin again.